Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Look Up, the news and current affairs programme from Compass Media. Every week, myself, Finbar, and my co-host, Gorman, look at news stories that either haven't got into the mainstream media headlines, or on the other hand, may not have had a fair hearing in the mainstream media headlines. Thanks for joining us again this week, Padraig.
I've got a Finbar, the old stretch in the evenings now coming in, so who'd be doing that other than listening to Look Up?
Oh, I'm telling you, it's week 12 or program 12 of this year. So we've been quite productive. And if you want to catch up on previous programs over not just this year, but into last year, you can go onto our website, which is mcompassmedia.com, and you can catch up with previous shows, as well as look at daily news that we put out there and other shows and other interviews as well. This week, Padraig, I'm going to let you lead with the eviction ban, which is just the main headline right across Ireland over the last week. The Irish government have lifted the eviction ban, or at least they haven't done anything to maintain the eviction ban past tonight, the night of recording, which is the 31st of March, 2023. Padraig, you want to lead with that and some headlines?
Yeah, Finbar, so there's been some shocking stories in the news this week. See one here from the Examiner, which is a family of 8 evicted from their home in Donegal. Seeing a little bit of context around this one, it's a landlord from across the border. We've seen similar things like this before, and it was quite a heartless kind of eviction. I don't know if you've seen any of the footage on it, but locks were changed and they were quite unceremoniously put out, and even lied to it would seem that they said there was a hotel booked for them, and obviously when they got there it wasn't the case, and with 8 children they would have needed 2 bedrooms, and I think it was quite high rent on that one as well. So that's one of the worst cases we've seen since this issue has really got to a boiling point with the end of the eviction ban. You can see again there's numerous stories as well. The Irish Times carrying a couple there. So 800 hotel rooms to be lost this week. That's going to put huge pressure on things, and we've seen that impacting various different sets of people. So as we know, there's a big influx of refugees, international protection applicants into the country, and now we have people who were in very vulnerable tenancies are going to be competing for the same space maybe that the government's going to have to try and create for them. So a very hard time of the year for people as we come into the tourist season with all those hotels being lost. Sinn Féin, I think, have been leading quite strongly in the Dáil with people for profit, calling out on a number of occasions, calling the government out on this, and it's quite hard. So I would say I think there's one there that I wanted to bring your attention to too, which is a tweet that was from Rita Cronin, where they actually went and they checked with TUSLA what would be the predicament of families should they go homeless. Will their children will they be in a situation where their children would be possibly be an intervention in the case of care, which is absolutely shocking. And the more shocking thing then is that it's confirmed to them that should they actually go on the streets, that it won't be the case. So the government's almost here creating the ground for these problems, and people like that end up in I think police stations overnight is the only place to have to go.
To be honest with you, I don't think any reassurances from TUSLA or the government on the response to children being made homeless and actually living on the streets. I don't trust that response. I think the state would have a duty of care to intervene in some way, especially for the children. I don't believe that response at all. I'm a director of services for a homeless charity in County Louth, and we've been inundated with calls of people who've been told to get out by their landlords now that this eviction ban is up. When I was an activist against evictions between 2012 and 2018-19 with the National Land League of Ireland, we could give people some hope that we could at least delay the process for them. You know, there was prolonged court processes. You could get adjournment after adjournment after adjournment. It's just not the same when it comes to landlords in rental. They go through a process to give you a set amount of time, and you're supposed to go out. If you don't, they can pretty quickly get an eviction order on you. There's a lot less hope. So what I've been telling people who've been phoning me is to get together. And I think we're going to call a public meeting in Dundalk in the next few weeks to try to get these people together to create some kind of a political force to try to immediately have something done. And if people could do the same thing in their own localities and create this political force that can be used and driven towards making emergency legislation. We already had the legislation in place. It just needs to be reenacted. And so I think there is impetus, there's will, there's conditions right now for something fast and something big to happen to stop this crisis. I'm not sure if the political leadership is there per se at the moment that's willing to call people out onto the streets. I'm not sure what to make of the advice coming from the left or the radical left, such as the Socialist Party and People Before Profit telling people to stay in their homes. People need support if they're going to be told to stay in their homes. You'll have cases of landlords going down with thugs. You'll have cases of security companies being brought in. It's not pleasant at all, especially if a court order is made. You know, it can ask a lot of people to ask them to stay with their children in a home if they're being intimidated. I think the first port of call for any advice is to get the people together right now. In terms of the case in Donegal, where family were put out quite violently onto the street by a group of men, I believe that in that case, those men are being brought to court over that. So that's a good sign in itself, if that happens, and if they're convicted of something. If they're not convicted of something, it would be the courts telling landlords who may be a little less scrupulous than other landlords, you can do what you want, you know. So landlords and I think security firms will be watching that court case. You had a video you wanted to show us as well, Padraig.
Yeah, so there's a video there from, there's actually two. There's one from Roderick O'Gorman and one from Richard Boyd Barrett, I think we'll roll.
Utterly shameful that some independents, so-called, in this House are horse trading with the government over local issues that have nothing to do with the homeless and housing crisis in exchange for potentially supporting you to put thousands of families and individuals into homelessness. They should be ashamed of themselves. The Green Party, who in their pre-election statement said they were, quote, against evictions into homelessness, who are going to vote and have voted with you to put thousands of people into homelessness. Some in the opposition say that the eviction ban should be kept temporarily. We will, of course, support those efforts, but People Before Profit's view is that all the approximate 750,000 people who live in private rented accommodation in this country should have security of tenure. And if they do nothing wrong, should not be evicted, as is the case in most of Europe. So, Taoiseach, this weekend, because you are clearly grimly determined to press ahead with this cruel and heartless measure to allow the eviction of thousands of people, the Cost of Living Coalition is calling for people to gather outside the gates of the Dáil at 1 o'clock to protest and resist against your eviction ban. And we will also be saying to people, anybody who overholds has every right to do so, given that they have nowhere else to go. Aren't they right, Taoiseach? Those who are facing eviction, who have nowhere to go, are they not right at this stage to protest and indeed to overhold? Would you meekly go into homelessness if you were faced with an unfair, no-fault eviction?
So we are working hard to support and particularly to ensure that families are accommodated, but it's going to remain challenging in the weeks and months ahead. We would expect to lose in and around 800 hotel rooms this week. Now, this is something that we've flagged for some period of time. We've taken very extensive contingency measures. We've been able to open additional accommodation and will be opening more additional accommodation around the country. But this week, in terms of, I suppose, those who are currently unaccommodated, the rooms we're losing, and of course the fact that obviously international protection applicants continue to arrive does pose real pressures on the department right now. And we do our best to meet our international obligations. We've gone from a situation where we were housing 7,500 refugees at the end of 2021 to over 20,000 now. I'm very upfront. We're not meeting our obligations to everybody right now, and we need to get to ourselves in a position where we can continue to do that. We've given clear indications in all channels that we can that the housing situation is difficult in Ireland right now for international protection applicants, and we've advised international protection applicants, if they are in the position to stay where they are and stay safely,
So that first video was Richard Boyd Barrett telling it like it is in relation to the lifting of the eviction ban and what is coming down the line. And then we had Minister for Children, Roderigo Gorman, talking about what the government are trying to do to alleviate the situation. And it appears to me they're not trying to do very much. Padraig, you wanted to cover those two videos.
Yeah, well, obviously they've gotten themselves into a situation where they can't cope, and the policies that have been enacted over the last year inevitably led them to a situation where they can't cope. The system is overwhelmed. There's no ideological problem with admitting that they don't have properties to go around. And as was flagged for a long time with the temporary accommodation hotels, when you come into the spring, they were going to go. And Roderigo Gorman is talking about additional accommodation. He's talking about replacement accommodation, first of all. So he's not adding to the system. He's trying to make up what the loss is. And it's interesting to note that he's actually calling on international protection applicants to not come now. So they've gone full circle, and they've proven themselves to be unable to cope with the situation.
Richard Boyd Barrett was calling for protest as well as everything else. He was also calling for people to stay in their homes. I've given my opinion on that already. In terms of what Roderigo Gorman had to say, they say they're trying. Well, they're not trying hard enough. I don't think you can believe anything that comes out of any of their mouths from the government anymore on any issue, because whatever they say, it proves to be false, or it proves to be a misdirection or a misprediction about what's going to happen into the near future. Whilst the eviction ban is being lifted and we're facing into this crisis, there seems to be some write-offs of a noteworthy characteristic in Ireland from certain banks to certain people. You want to cover that, Padraig?
Yeah, so Finbar, the Irish Times had a story there. The AIB have written off more than 1 million in debts for 83 customers. So the bank told the Oireachtas Finance Committee that 534 million in debt was forgiven for 1,900 customers, with more than 90% of their debts written off since 2015. The AIB disclosed further details on its debt write-offs for customers almost 3 weeks after the bank's managing director of retail banking, Jim O'Keefe, told the Oireachtas Finance Committee that there were no special deals for special individuals. More than 80 customers each secured debt write-downs of more than 1 million from AIB in private deals since 2015 across 1,900 customers. An average of 275,000 was written off. These were agreed outside the formal bankruptcy and personal insolvency process. ANC leader Paolo Tobin, a member of the Finance Committee, said that the 83 customers who had each more than 1 million in debt written off were very unique and significant outliers. The question that has to be asked is, what makes them unique? With a €500 million cost, it is important there's transparency in relation to this. This is a bank that is majority state-owned and had public interest directors, said Mr. Tobin. In the letter sent to the committee, the bank said that of the 1,936 customers who received write-downs since 2015, 1,359 were small and medium-sized enterprise, or 70% of the total, and 577 were mortgage customers, making up the remaining 30%. So that seems like a hell of a lot of money written down for a small section of people, and as is called out there, these are unique and significant outliers. So transparency is the key word too. Really like to get to the bottom of that, and what qualifies you for such write-downs when most people, as we speak here, like we're going through an issue in the rental sector where people are being evicted, but there's still people being evicted for not paying their mortgages. And what gets you qualified for write-downs like this? I think we'd all love to know.
My experience with the National Land League years ago was that banks weren't willing to write down for the average Joe soap. In fact, they added on with interest after interest. And I saw some people who had original loans of 50 and 60,000, mortgage-based loans, home-based loans of 50 or 60,000, and that going up to 250,000, 300,000, 350,000 over time as they were more and more unable to pay. So rather than the average Joe soap having write-offs, my experience is they had write-ons. Their debt got bigger and bigger and bigger. AIB may be writing off, and these people may be quids in. They're not the only ones that are quids in Ireland. The ESB seem to be doing pretty well, Padraig.
Okay, Finbar. So the ESB profits have more than doubled since last year. amid high wholesale electricity prices. State energy company will pay 327 million dividend to the Exchequer. Profits after tax at the State Energy Group ESB more than doubled as high wholesale energy electricity prices boosted earnings. Profits after tax and excluding exceptional items more than doubled to 649.3 million last year, compared to 265.9 million in 2021, ESB said on Wednesday. Revenue increased to 7.6 billion from 5.2 billion. Company reported that high wholesale profits here and in Britain boosted operational profit from its generating and trading arm by 590 million to 774 million last year. Its supply division, which includes Electric Ireland, lost 109 million as the company paid a £50 winter credit to residential customers in the Republic and saw its charges in Britain limited by a price cap. Paul Stapleton, the ESB Chief Financial Officer, dubbed the 2022 an extraordinary year in global energy markets with volatile prices leading to high profits from its generating businesses in Ireland and Britain. The increase in profitability also allows us to recommend an enhanced dividend of 327 million, brings to almost 1.5 billion the total dividend provided over the last 10 years. So while we know there's huge costs being added onto ordinary people in their utility bills, we're seeing huge earnings. They have made a point of letting it be known that they actually have lost in their supply division 109 million, and they're citing the €50 winter credit and a cap on charges in Britain at the same time that they're making this huge dividend from exports. So as a state-owned, almost fully owned entity, like, you would think that it would be possible for people who are in such distress due to the high cost of living to see, a reduction, or at least what they've gotten in Britain, which is a price cap. So I think it's remarkable then when we roll on to the next item, which is Fine Gael having a say on the matter.
Yeah, this is a video, Padraig, and I only saw this afternoon after you sent it to me. And they have some hard neck members of the governing Fine Gael party asking people if they're struggling, and then asking them to vote in a poll or to sign a petition, I should say, so that they can forward that petition to the energy companies. This is the Fine Gael government that have every bit of power in their hands to deal with this crisis. Let's have a look at this video.
We've all seen energy prices increase dramatically over the last 12 months. Almost every 2 or 3 months there's been increases of 30% on your energy bills. That has happened for businesses and it's happened for ordinary householders, and it's had a real impact on the cost of living for people. And if you're like me and you agree that companies should act now and act decisively to lower their prices to support hard-pressed families, well, sign this petition here. For more information, visit finegael.ie.
You sent me that video, Padraig. What's your take on it?
I think it's absurd, Finbar, that government party that have been in government for over a decade, and clearly have the ability to influence the state-owned energy company, asking people to sign up to a petition. It looks like gamesmanship and an attempt to portray themselves as some sort of representatives that we know they haven't been. But it's laughable, really, that we would be led to sign a petition being raised by them for something that they can do, that they can prevent. They can put the price cap in place in the first place, They must think we're absolute donkeys. They must think we're complete idiots. I'm sure there's a few people out there that will fall for that, but I think the mass majority of people are looking at that kind of bullshit, to be straight about it, looking at that kind of bullshit and thinking, my goodness, we need to get rid of this lot as soon as possible. Is there a banking crisis coming? You sent me an article today by David McWilliams suggesting that we may be having a banking crisis into the near future. Do you want to cover that, Padraig? Yeah, so I think the fact that I've seen it was from Dave McWilliams, and he was quite prominent in the last banking crash in 2008. I think he was visited late at night by Brian Lenihan, famously. So I said I'd reference it anyway. So David McWilliams has said that we are back in the land of the bank bailout. Central banks have two broad objectives: to keep a lid on inflation and protect the stability of the banking system. When inflation is rising, central banks will push up interest rates in order to take money out of the system. When the banking system is fragile, he says, central banks will keep interest rates down to inject money into the system. What do central banks do when inflation demands higher rates, and at the same time the banking system needs lower rates. That is where we are today, he says. He says, on both sides of the Atlantic, inflation is sufficiently high to require rate hikes, but both America and Europe are stalked by the threat of bank failure. Raising rates to keep inflation down will threaten fragile banks, but keeping rates low to save the banks will let inflation rip. As tight ropes go, it's quite the high wire act, he says. Ultimately, when global interest rates rise from 0 to 4% or 5%, something has to crack. That breaking sound was heard in California and Swiss banks over the last week or the past couple of weeks. And this means we are back in the land of the bank bailout. So that's a very short extract out of an article that he wrote, which is just to alert the Irish people that we're back in a situation where we're perilously close to have to have another look at the banking situation and whatever that entails. We know what it entailed the last time, practically nationalising them all and paying back debts that were nothing to do with the people in the country. So I know it's not exactly the same conditions here, but that's where we're being kind of teed up for at the moment.
I think the media, the mainstream media, a lot of economists are trying to convince us that this is purely about the balance between inflation on the one hand and interest rates on the other hand. And this effort to keep inflation down by raising interest rates, which unfortunately suppress the activities, the loaning activities of banks, and makes it more difficult for banks to loan out money, more difficult for businesses to access loans and also to pay those loans back as the interest is higher on them. So that's what we are being told. But nobody ever mentions the fact that the world has been split in more than half. We have, on the one hand, Europe, the United States, Australia, and a few other countries, which form, and I'm going to be very rough on this, but form around a quarter, we'll say, of the population of the world. And then you have the other 3/4 of the world that we have been isolating ourselves away from through sanctions and through other things. And we're now doing it to China as well as Russia and other places. This is what's really, I think, impacting what's going on. The Chinese government did its first international natural liquefied gas deal yesterday morning in yuan, so in their own currency, the first time ever. And this is what's happening around the world now. The dollar is being ditched. It's being ditched by all the BRICS companies. It's been ditched for the yuan and also for more nationalized countries in the Middle East and places like this. And as the dollar is ditched, inflation is going to go through the roof because it has less and less value as it's used less and less. And yet there's so much of it out there on computer screens anyway. So we have that problem. We have major supply problems. We have indications of economic contraction. We may not have that so much in the United States because they are getting financed to arm wars all around the world. And so the United States may not suffer just as much just yet with it. But the point I'm making is overall that these economists and commentators don't comment on the macro factors that are really causing crisis and giving people jitters around the world. That we have reduced our market by 3/4 because the crazy politicos in the United States and the Atlanticists in the EU are further and further isolating China. And yet China is Germany's main trading partner, Ukraine's major trading partner, and so many other countries. And yet we're going to suddenly cut them off as well. And the trade with China goes both ways. We're told that China is a communist country, but China has a variety of economic classes as much as we have in some ways. People in China buy European cars. They buy European goods at very high prices. And we're just cutting all of that off. It's the same with people in Russia, cutting off business with Russia and dissing our own economies and doing that, and then blaming the traditional, oh, this is about inflation or this is about interest rates. And of course, the working class will be blamed again. No, you can't ask for pay rises. This is all your fault for the pay that you're getting. That kind of stuff as well. Sorry for that rant, Padraig, but no. I think a bigger picture needs to be shown onto this.
I would agree with you. I would fully agree with you. And they leave out some very important facts over how they have been setting things up for us to live over the past few years. Huge debts run up in the COVID era. Surely they have to be a factor in what we're seeing now. All these things that they don't even talk about. So yeah, I totally agree with you. They're given a narrative there, and it's almost a narrative. You know, this whole thing about having this open, globally influenced financial system that, you know, it's never anybody locally's fault when these things, when these external influences happen. So that's when they do reference it at all, but they try and internalize it as much as they can. So yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Our second last Irish story tonight is about planning, and particularly planning around North Dublin out towards Balbriggan. You want to cover that again, Padraig?
Yeah, Finbar. So there's a story here which I think is significant in a time where we're looking to try and get as many people housed as possible. So An Bord Pleanála has refused planning permission for a new car-dependent 127 residential unit scheme near Balbriggan after the developer failed to put in adequate pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. In refusing planning permission for the Kinvara Properties Limited strategic housing development proposal for a site 4 kilometres northwest of Balbriggan, the appeals board ruled that without the adequate pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, development would be largely car dependent. As a result, the board ruled the scheme would therefore promote unsustainable transport modes and be contrary to the provisions of the Fingal County Development Plan. The planned development site was located 1 kilometre east of the M1 motorway and the surrounding area rural in character. The appeals board refused plan permission for the scheme made up of 65 houses and 62 duplex units after Fingal County Council recommended that plan permission be refused on 5 separate grounds. The appeals board inspector Elaine Power recommended refusal and agreed that the council and third party concerns that the proposal did not provide for safe and convenient road use and that future residents of the scheme will be car dependent, setting an undesirable precedent for similar sites where connectivity is limited and non-existent. In a separate SHD ruling, the board has granted planning permission to the Land Development Agency for 345 unit scheme in Hacklestown, Skerries in North Dublin. The LDA can now proceed with the construction of 8 blocks comprising 84 one-bed units, 104 two-bed units and 157 three-bed units, ranging in 8 blocks ranging from 2 to 4 stories in height. The appeals board granted planning permission after pointing out that the scheme is of strategic and national importance given its potential to substantively contribute to the achievement of the government's national policy to increase housing supply. The board also concluded that the proposal would constitute an acceptable quantum and density of the development in the intermediate urban location and will be acceptable in terms of urban design, height, scale of development. So what I see here, Finbar, is they're clearly going for as high a density urban setting as they can. Now, Skerries and Balbriggan are very close to each other, so the demographic of people that would possibly compete for housing in this area will be very much the same. But they've rejected what is a more private development on the Balbriggan side, where they've called out a number of times that the use of a car is a major issue for them. On the Skerries side, Finbar, it seems like it's something that we've probably seen in planning between Britain and Ireland in the last year. There's been a move for a different type of arrangement when it comes to urban living over rural, and especially when it comes to car and pollution and the possibility then of using public transport. So there's definitely a shift here as far as I can see, and I think it's one to just to see if this recurs over the coming months and see if there's a trend in this.
It sounds a bit bullshitty to me. It's mixing up different needs and not necessarily getting the jigsaw right when you're trying to put those different needs pieces together. In a housing estate, is there really a need in an area for 127 houses for cycle lanes? Is there really a need going through a housing estate for actual cycle lanes? You know, if we are in the middle of a housing crisis here, and we don't need these further obstacles being thrown in the way of housing development when we have a situation where we had 250,000 new people coming in on top of the other people last year that needed housing. We're probably going to have the same this year again, and we just don't need these obstacles. I spoke to a developer, a small developer, and he's also an engineer in Dundalk yesterday, and he spoke about the fact that in County Louth, the housing associations provided 60% or thereabouts, these are just average figures, of the social housing, we'll say, last year, and the local authorities provided 30%. So apparently the local authorities got a stern warning that they had to up their game for the figures for the coming year. And this developer is concerned that what they'll actually do is they'll actually refuse local authority development applications, so that the statistics or the percentages, which is what they're looking at, what they were warned about, the percentages will change. but the actual number of houses will not be met because they're just playing around with numbers. And so they will potentially refuse into the future the houses built by housing associations, and may build a few extra ones themselves and try to invert those statistics or those percentages without actually having to do very much. So obstacle after obstacle after obstacle for causes that have nothing to do with this crisis that are being shoved in there. It's almost like the American style politics that's been brought over to Ireland, that we'll introduce a bill or an act in some way about one issue, and you'll stick in things about other issues into it that you know the opposition can't vote for. And then you'll point at the opposition and you'll say, oh, look, you refused to vote for new houses. When in reality, at the end of that, we're stuck in that we were going to have a nuclear plant, or that we're going to join NATO or something like that. So there's the problematic. There's so much pettiness, manipulation and pathology in Irish politics that even when the most immediate and obvious crisis of the century, last century and this century, is presented to us, it's all the pettiness. Oh, what can I get out of this in one way or another? What other schemes that we have can we force into this so people can't say no to them? And that's what, to my mind, seems to be going on here, Padraig. On the final Irish story tonight, you want to cover Kerry Harrington, and she's been in a little bit of trouble both online and on the mainstream this week.
Yeah, so Finbar, I thought this is what we should talk about, because cancel culture is something that we've all become aware of over the last few years, and we have somebody who's a sporting ambassador for the country. She did reply to a tweet that was, I think it was a GB News tweet late last year, and that was in relation to an actual murder in France of a schoolgirl. And I think she explains herself quite well afterwards in saying that she had shared tweet and that she didn't mean to cause offence, and I think that it was cleared up at the time on those terms. But it has been raised again. She was on an interview Off the Ball, which is a news talk sports programme. So maybe the best context is to listen to that maybe, and then we'll have a look at the context around the tweets.
You're talking there, Kelly, as well. We're kind of discussing the idea of role models, and I know this is probably an area that you've been thrust into because of your talent and your success. And given that, and given all of the diversity as well in the North inner city now, is something that's cropped up in recent years as well. I know you've had a number of interactions on social media and on Twitter that have suggested you've strongly held views on immigration. Are those opinions you still feel strongly about?
I don't actually. I switched off there when you said diversity in the inner city. There's diversity all over Dublin, so I did switch off. So I don't actually know what the rest of the question was there. Sorry.
No, just talking about. I know you had a couple of interactions on social media on Twitter in October where you were talking about anti-immigration, and there was a quote tweet from a GB News tweet where there were links between violence and immigration and migrants. And I know on social media, I guess, in your position as a role model, those comments carry weight. So I was just wondering if you have still the same held views on immigration.
So I feel right now at the moment that you're trying to hang me out to dry. So for that, I'll say next question.
Well, not at all. The discussion, I guess, Kelly, just needs to be had.
Yeah, that was a post in October, so I do feel like you are hanging me out to dry, and you know me by now, and you know you're going to get the truth off me, and that's exactly the truth as it is, as I'm sitting here now. I feel like you've brought that up to try and bring up a bit of controversy.
Certainly not.
Okay, Finbar, so that's all the substantive amount of video that we have on that, and it fairly describes. I think she made her position clear that she didn't want to speak about it. She wanted to stay out of politics on the issue. And I thought she had made her position reasonably clear on it before, that she didn't mean to cause any offence. They're citing the issue of diversity in working class communities, but she makes it clear that there's diversity all over Dublin, and she felt like she's being hung out to dry on the tweet. So I think what we might just walk through some of the tweets that were put out on it, and I can give you a little bit more on it. Okay, Finbar, so just looking at this here, so this one on the far left there on the screen, you can see is the original tweet, and I think it was based on a motion that she retweeted it, and I think anybody would have their emotions triggered when they see this. Now, there's a point I would make on this. I think it is wrong to categorize as a very, very significant thing that it is migrants were alleged to have carried this out, rather than to say murderers or rapists have carried this out. I think it's a distinction that needs to be made, because people can generalize. It may well be that there are migrants, and it may well have happened a number of times in the country, but I think that is the problem that many people have with it. But I believe she kind of cleared her position on it. But yet and all, you still see the cancel mob coming for her. There's a tweet there from Timmy Dooley, and he's making the point that she is an ambassador for the Spar brand in Ireland. Now, Spar have subsequently come out and said they will be continuing with her. They don't see any issue with how she's addressed the issue. So it's just one of these typical things where you see a mob kind of forming, and I think this was kind of out of the blue. This issue had been raised late last year, and then they raised it again. Just towards the end of that, I just wanted to bring in some context as well. A couple of weeks back, Gary Lineker on the BBC made a particular case for liberalism towards immigrants, and there was a groundswell of support for him on it. If you just look down further on the far end of the screen, you would see that Gary Lineker was probably guilty of a misogynistic tweet as well last year when the English female team won the European Championships. Now, Gary Lineker seemed to be forgiven quite quickly, and that seems to be airbrushed out of history. But it seems that somebody who has an opinion on this side of the water is getting pursued for it. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy involved in that, and I think cancel culture should be reserved for people who truly deserve it and who are actually discriminating against people. I think she made her position clear that she wasn't doing that.
I don't think just having read the original tweet that this is all based on, it's highlighting the fact that a woman was murdered by someone from outside of the country in France, and that it was the 12th female at that time. I don't know if that's factual or not. It seems like it might be a bit of an issue, you know. And is that about vetting? Is that what the core issue there is? That people need to be vetted? Maybe that's what she's saying. And if so, I don't see that's so terrible. What I do see is the media, the mainstream media, in line with the government and the likes of Tim Dooley, that they are warning people. They're wrapping a young lass over the knuckles publicly. They're dragging her over the coals publicly to warn everybody else. You be careful what you say, especially on this issue. So it's coming to a point where I believe soon, if potential laws are enacted in Ireland, you won't be able to say if an asylum seeker committed a crime. If a court case has found that person guilty and you say that they're an asylum seeker, I'm told that there's quite severe penalties coming down the line in new legislation coming into Ireland. So this is the wrap over the knuckle for all of the influencers, all of the well-known celebrities in Ireland. Don't step out of line, or we'll do to you, or worse, what we did to young Kerry Harrington. And I think that's what this is really about. What do you think about that idea, Padraig?
I do think so. Like what struck me about it was it seemed to be kind of abruptly out of order, seeing as this tweet was sent out late last year and it's been raised on the sports program now. It just didn't seem to fit. It does seem to be loaded for whatever reason.
Okay, moving on to international news. The CEO of TikTok, Xu Zhiqiu, was in front of the American Congress being grilled on what he thought was going to be a grilling about TikTok and the work of TikTok and how TikTok operates in the United States. Instead, what he faced was a whole day of a barrage of what seemed to be anti-Chinese sentiment, raw, unfiltered anti-Chinese sentiment. Here's a picture of Xu Zhiqiu being questioned by two different senators. The first senator is asking him about the alleged Uyghur genocide by the Chinese government in China, which has been disproven on numerous occasions, but the US government persists with the line that the Uyghurs have been persecuted. So this is Xu being asked, first of all, about that. And the second video, Xu is being asked if he would divest his holdings in TikTok and invest in the United States, essentially. And his two answers are quite telling. Let's have a look at this and we'll come back.
Do you agree that the Chinese government has persecuted the Uyghur population?
Well, it's deeply concerning to hear about all accounts of human rights abuse. My role here is to explain what our platform does on this.
It's a pretty easy question. Do you agree that the Chinese government has persecuted the Uyghur population?
Congressman, I'm here to describe TikTok and what we do as a platform. And as a platform, we allow our users to freely express their views on this issue and any other issue that matters to them.
Well, you didn't answer the question.
I don't think ownership is the issue here. With a lot of respect, American social companies don't have a good track record with data privacy and user security. I mean, look at Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, just one example. So I do think that, it is not about the ownership. It is a lot about making sure we have Project Texas, making sure that we're protecting and firewalling US user data from unwanted foreign access, giving third parties to come in to have a look at this and making sure that everybody is comfortable. We're giving transparency and third-party monitoring. And that's what we're doing for Project Texas.
Well, so that was Xu Zhi, the CEO of TikTok, being grilled in the US Congress. And I saw it was a newspaper interview that he'd done after the Congress meetings, in which he said he just felt he was being berated for being Chinese, and all of the propaganda, he didn't use that word, but all of the propaganda associated with the Chinese government was being put on his shoulders. And this is part of a wider campaign, I believe, and many other people believe, against China, because China will soon be a greater power than the United States economically. It's aligning itself more and more with Russia. It's been forced to do so by the shenanigans of mainly the US administration, the Biden administration, and the deep state, but also the deep state in the EU and Atlanticist elements within the EU. And so we have this anti-China sentiment that's continuing. And that is quite ridiculous. I've seen some just absolutely outrageous headlines. Here's another one about TikTok, which will give you a laugh. So this headline is a headline: ammo manufacturer can't make extra artillery shells because TikTok data center is using all the electricity. We are concerned because we see our future growth is challenged by the storage of cat videos. So this is trying to actually suggest that TikTok is stopping the West from arming Ukraine, because the energy being used for TikTok should be used for the manufacture of ammo. It's just an absolutely ridiculous, in my mind, discrimination-laden headline. What do you think, Padraig?
Yeah, it does seem to be, and they seem to use stereotypes, and they seem to use certain nations for purposes to try and get themselves out of issues, to try and make bogeymen out of these people. It is ridiculous. That last heading that you had up there is totally ridiculous, in terms of energy being the issue around the manufacture of weapons. I think there's certainly more of that. Personally, in terms of the human rights elements that we've heard about China for years, I've heard it for that long, and I suppose I never investigated it exactly myself. I probably need to do that. I'm still not convinced. I've heard a lot about the oppression of the Uyghurs that you mentioned, so it's something I need to verify a little bit further myself, Finbar, because I had heard that, and I suppose I'm not looking into it. It's been a narrative for a very long time about human rights issues in China. But there again, when you're starting to see a trend now of scapegoating them for everything, I'm starting to ask myself questions as well. So yeah, it's a trend that keeps continuing.
I think everything from even Tiananmen Square, like I quite often will ask people, how many people were killed in Tiananmen Square by the tanks? And some people say 5, 10, some say hundreds, thousands. None. The tanks stopped because they wouldn't run the man over. If that had been American soldiers in Iraq, they would have blown the living daylights out of everybody. Think about it. If you want to follow up on the Uyghur allegations and the debunking of those allegations, a good place to start would be the grey zone. So you'd be looking at Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal as a start to the deconstruction of these allegations against China in terms of Uyghur genocide. Quite the opposite, in fact. The younger population is growing, its wealth is growing, and there are regions in China which are almost Islamic based regions that the Chinese government allow them to have their own independence to do that as well. So I think it's important to check all that stuff out. We're in a multipolar world. We have to abandon and drop this James Bond type nonsense that was drilled into our heads since we were children, and we have to mature up and we have to look at the world in a mature way. There's no way that a government can survive without satisfying the needs of the people. That's a reality of those governments, especially when externally there's every effort being made to destabilize them. The people are happy with them. They wouldn't, if they weren't, those governments would not be in place for such a long time as, for instance, Xi's government is in. That's my take on things. But I would like to explore these issues further into the future, because as much as we talk about our relationship with the United States, the future, realistically, when you look at the demographics, when you look at the statistics, when you look at everything, the future is not the United States in terms of economy. The future is Asia, the future is Russia, the future is Europe and the United States. Not just the United States dictating all economic policy. As I said earlier, the dollar is being ditched right around the world. The United States is yesterday's man, it would appear. Just keeping up in this story for a little minute, Mick Wallace spoke on this very issue in the European Parliament this week. He raised the issue of TikTok and growing anti-Chinese sentiment in general. We'll have a look at this video and we'll come back.
The move against TikTok has more to do with a reckless new Cold War posturing and driving a wedge between the EU and China than anything to do with safeguarding user data. It's true that TikTok has the capacity to control content and collect and store its users' personal data. This is also true of Google, Facebook, Twitter and others. There are countless ways for governments to target people. If we really cared about this, why didn't the Commission do nothing to address the abuses revealed by the prison programme revelations? Why don't we have a set of rules that adequately protect people in the EU? Governments that restrict access to Western platforms are accused of being authoritarian. Yet now we're banning platforms based on pure suspicion and speculation. We have regulations for a reason. They should be applied to all platforms in a rational manner. We can engage with companies to address concerns. Instead, we're busy making ourselves look unreasonable, confrontational and almost as hysterical as the Americans.
As a final comment from me on this TikTok issue, I was amused by the musings of a number of American tweeters who were lamenting the fact that in China, the children on TikTok are interested in science, experiments, education, nature, all those kind of things. And the kids on TikTok in the United States are interested in violence, sex, drugs, all these kind of things. And he was trying to suggest that it was the Chinese government making this happen, when in reality, TikTok reflects its own culture. TikTok reflects the cultures of the users. And as just like Facebook and all the other ones do. And as a result of that, the reality is he looked in the mirror and he didn't like what he saw. Any final take on this issue, Porter?
No, I think it's true. I think the comments were made as well around Cambridge Analytica and what was exposed there. So it is hypocrisy to say that there's a bigger threat coming from the Chinese side than there is from European or American side.
There is a threat from China. There is the threat that China will continue to do good business and be good business people. That's the threat, because the United States and certain elements in Europe feel threatened by that because they want to be number one, or they want to stay at number one. And China is doing what we asked them to do good business, to be globalists economically. And when they do it and they succeed in it, they're punished. And to my mind, it's just what the mafia do, what the United States do. Don't buy from them or we're going to burn your business down. Just like what the mafia do. Staying in international news, Syria has been under constant attack almost for the last few weeks in particular. Damascus has been attacked on numerous occasions in and around the airport and other areas. That's by Israel. In the east, a number of American bases that are there with American personnel for the sole purpose of stealing Syrian oil, which they're doing on a daily basis. I'm told that a couple of days ago, on one day, at least 80 very large oil tankers of American origin were seen taking oil out of East Syria to Iraq, where it's loaded off and sold off. So this is really happening. In the meantime, Syria is being attacked. But on the other side of the scales, Syria is now making peace with Saudi Arabia, making peace with Turkey. It looks like a lot of the warring and the fractionism is going to come to an end, despite the best efforts of the United States and Israel. There seems to be rapprochement and more likelihood of peace coming in the Middle East. These attacks on Syria by Israel in particular seem to have increased since this new radical Zionist government have come into power. We're going to have a look at a couple of very short videos of those attacks in Damascus the other day, and we will come back to you. Now, if you spoke to some of the international organizations, particularly the UN, you'd expect them to condemn attacks by Israel on a sovereign country like Syria and onto a city like Damascus, especially attacks that can kill civilians. That's not happening. In fact, the UN spokesperson for the Secretary General of the UN says that there aren't any American troops in Syria. Let's have a look at this video.
Do you think the presence of the US military in Syria is illegal or not?
That's not an issue that we're dealing with at this stage. There's been a war.
But is that because it sounds very familiar. This week we talk a lot about the UN Charter, the international law, and relative resolutions. But it sounds to me a foreign military based presence in another country without invitation sounds like something else to me. You know.
I'll leave your analysis to you. There's at this stage.
What's the difference between Syria, the situation in Syria, and the situation in Ukraine?
There's no U.S. armed forces inside of Syria, and so I don't have a. It's not a parallel situation.
You're sure there's no U.S. military personnel?
I believe there's military activity.
Yeah,
but in terms of a ground presence in Syria, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, 5 U.S. service members were injured in that attack. If there were no U.S. service members in Syria, how could they got injured? That's weird, right? Should I ask you about that?
That was the spokesperson for the Secretary General of the UN, Farhan Haq, and he seems to think there's no US troops in Syria. Well, even CNN admits that there's plenty of US troops in Syria and that they're there for the oil, but they don't say that bit. But they do admit it no problem when it comes to the attacks that I mentioned earlier. Let's have a look at this headline for a start. This is a headline from CNN Politics. 6 US troops diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries following Iran-backed attacks in Syria. So what was that? 6 US troops? But I thought, according to the UN Secretary General's spokesperson, that's the UN Secretary General, he speaks for him, I thought there was no US troops in Syria. Let's read this. 6 US service members have been diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries as a result of attacks from Iran-backed groups in Syria last week. 4 US troops at the coalition base near Hasaka that was attacked on March 23rd by a suspected Iranian drone, and 2 service members at mission support site Green Village attacked on March 24th have been identified as having brain injuries in screening since the attacks, Pentagon spokesperson Brigadier General Patrick Ryder said on Thursday. As a standard procedure, all personnel in the vicinity of a blast are screened for traumatic brain injuries, he said. So those additional injuries were identified during post-attack medical screenings. One of the service members have been transferred to Baghdad for further treatment. This is where they shipped the oil over to Iraq. A US defense official familiar with the matter told CNN, noting that Baghdad has more advanced treatment options and better specialists than remaining on base in Syria. So I'm just putting this story up in general to point out that the US has troops in Syria and they're there for the sole purpose of stealing Syrian oil, the oil from the people of Syria that have been sanctioned for so many years, that are really, really struggling, and the United States is blatantly stealing its oil. Nothing more than gangsters. What's your take on that, Porter?
There's no doubt about it that they're in the country, no doubt about it that the UN is very uncomfortable about admitting it, that they don't know what the party line should be on that and how they should respond to such a question when really the truth is apparent there, that there is no denying that they have a presence there. So you can't really believe much that they say, and like you often wonder how is there actually going to be change in how they conduct their international affairs? Is it going to come domestically? Well, they have many ways of dealing with domestic threats as well. Like, so it's quite difficult to see how you straighten out their whole look at the outside world. It seems that they're basically just imperialists. They go all over the world and take what they want.
On Sunday, the 10th of April, we're going to be interviewing Vanessa Beeley, who is embedded in Damascus. She's an English journalist, English-Irish journalist. I've interviewed her before. She's well known around the world. She is of her own mind. She stands up to the United States. I think there's certain elements of the US government hate her for her truths and her honesty. And we'll be talking to her on the 10th of April, which is on a Sunday. So tune in for that, where we're going to get the lowdown on what's happening from Damascus. In our second last story tonight, there have been several walkouts in relation to the Ukraine NATO-Russia conflict. The walkouts are on both sides. Here's our first video where a number of members, or attendees, I should say, at a UN Human Rights Forum walked out when Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, spoke. But walkouts weren't only happening against Russian diplomats and members of government. A significant number of members of the Austrian Parliament walked out when Zelensky began to address them via video screen this week as well. Let's have a look at this.
Передусім я хочу подякувати трьом вашим містам, лікарням, ваших міст, Відня, Лінца і Грац. Клініки саме цих міст, які наших дітей, дорослих з міста Бровари, Київської області, які отримали страшні опіки нас.
Walking out doesn't seem to be the way to achieve a diplomatic solution. And, you know, I can understand the Russians not taking the West seriously, because when they did go in and agree to the Minsk agreements, they were just made fools of, because the West, Germany, France, that was supposed to be guarantors of the agreement, have admitted, Merkel and Sarkozy have both admitted that they were not serious with that agreement. That was just trying to buy time to turn Ukraine into a fortress to fight Russia on behalf of the United States and elements within the EU. So how can Russia really trust? But, you know, they have this walking out on the other side as well. And it just, to me, it just seems like peace is as far away as ever. What do you think, Patrick?
It does seem to be as far away as ever, and it's even projected to go on for another period of time. It doesn't seem like there is a horizon where there's going to be talks or ceasefire or anything like that imminent. If anything, our own country and countries in this region pledging more and more support, and still talking along the lines of military victories. Hopefully there's going to be some change there, but it's brutal, the human toll that's being cost without what seems like very basic interventions, like between ourselves and Switzerland, neutral nations that should be standing up and doing something in diplomatic terms.
Yeah. If you were to predict the future based on arms commitments and ammo commitments and things like that, some of the weaponry commitments made by the West to Ukraine won't be fulfilled for between 8 and 10 years. So are they saying that this war, they hope, will go on for 8 to 10 years to slowly bleed the Russians and possibly the Chinese if they eventually become involved as well? So if you're going along that sign, because these are all deals that are signed off and these are contracts that are signed. And so I'm sure the companies like Raytheon and all the arms manufacturers are rubbing their hands together that a war might go on for the next 10 years, a major conflict like this. In reality, it looks like the Ukrainian lines are in a state of collapse. They keep on talking about this offensive that they're going to launch, possibly around the Zaporizhia area. It looks highly unlikely. They have very little ammo. They're admitting that themselves. They have very little armory. Their men that they have left have little experience. They're untrained. As we've seen from all the videos, they're dragging anybody and everybody off the streets in Kiev and other areas and sending them to the front line with little to no training. It's been called a meat grinder. So if it was a natural war of sorts where two sides were fighting, Ukraine and Russia, it looks like it's coming to a pretty close end. Should have ended actually about 9 months ago, really. But this continued throwing arms and this continued winding up by the US and by the Europeans, you can tell how long this is going to last. Our final story tonight, we're looking at, we have been following over the last few months this concept of the 15-minute city, particularly in and around the area of Oxfordshire and Oxford City in the UK, where there has been a significant pilot scheme launched, which has in place traffic obstacles, digital recording of serial numbers, all these things planned and piloted. A lot of objection from the community, a lot of vigilantism by the community against the infrastructure that's been put in place for these 15-minute cities. That kind of went the other way this week when video went out and went viral online showing environmentalists who have gone vigilante themselves and are now policing and enforcing this 15-minute city concept. Let's have a look at this video.
Hello. Morning. Have you got any right to stop here?
Yeah, you'll see that this is a no for motor vehicles. This is motor
Yeah,
vehicles.
do you go to work?
Yes, I'm on my way to work.
Yeah,
So
what time you're going?
Stop here to talk to my friends for about 15 minutes.
Yeah, you stay here just all your day, just wasting people time.
No, enforcing the traffic law. You're not allowed to drive through here.
So, have you got anything to show me that you can stop me?
See that sign?
Yeah, excuse me, I want to see you. No, you don't understand. Yeah, don't worry. I want to see if you got something to show me that you can stop me. No, you. Can you stop me to go through there?
No, but if you go through, you will get a fine.
Okay, I want to get through.
It's a great shame you can't sort of think a bit more about
No, okay. Can you open, please? Thank you. If I get a fine.
I will film you going through it.
Yeah, okay, don't worry. Okay, can you move now?
So that's what I presume to be, now they didn't specifically name themselves in the video as environmentalists, but I presume to be environmentalists who are, in a sense of being vigilantes, are enforcing this 15-minute city policy, which is not a law, it's a policy. And what do you make of that video, Padraig?
Yeah, like we've been seeing this for a number of months since it was first brought out as an idea. And it's really starting to look quite annoying, isn't it? Like, I mean, as much as it seemed like a bit of a new age scheme to save the planet, it's starting to disrupt people's lives. This is not going to be something that people are going to be happy with. As much as there's moves all over the place to try and look sustainably and try and take things that are going to be good for the environment. Like as we've said before, there's no proof on these things in terms of how they're actually documenting what this change is bringing to society. What does it actually, what are the benefits? Where has the discussion been? It's just authoritarianism, really. And now people feel empowered to take things into their own hands as they feel like, you know, the climate question is so settled that they could only be right in doing this. So it's getting worse and worse in terms of absurdity, and it's not something I'd like to see in my area, Finbar.
It does seem that there are plans to cause restrictions. From the earlier report that you covered on the planning development refusals based on lack of cycle lanes, lack of this, and emphasis which appears to be to get rid of cars, on that basis, It seems that in Ireland they're introducing similar things in a slightly different way, but they're just not letting people know about it to a degree. They're just putting it into the planning. But when you have civilians who are taking the law into their own hands in this case and blocking people, it's just creating more social friction. But we'll watch this space, as we have been watching this space for the last few months, and we'll see where this is going, not only in Oxford, but also throughout the UK, Ireland, and Europe and the world. That's the end of today's show, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Like, share wherever you can. If you're on a platform that allows subscription, please subscribe to us. It will cost you nothing, but it'll put us up in the ratings. And we're doing our best to get the truth and a little bit of balance to you. And we're hoping you'll give a little bit back by sharing and subscribing. If you want to catch some of the stuff that we can't put in the show and that we can't print at some of our articles because they'll be censored, maybe about different sensory type issues, if you know what I mean, then drop onto our website, which is mcompassmedia.com, where you'll get all our uncensored stuff. In the meantime, folks, until next week, have a safe week. Thanks for joining us, Padraig.
Thanks very much, Finbar. Thanks for watching.
And we'll talk to you folks again next week.